Hi, Naz here again. So I am doing yet another video, and this is to expand on a brief point that I mentioned in my last video, the idea of culture and feeling like an outsider in terms of culture, especially in North American society, where we think that where someone's culture and someone's identity is really defined by what race culture they belong to. So I kind of wanted to touch on that and criticize that a bit, as someone who can't really identify with any sort of race culture. Just to give some context, like I came here with my family when I was 3, and even though I came here at such a young age, I didn't really feel that I could fully identify and relate to Indian culture, and I couldn't relate and totally identify with Western culture. So I kind of wanted to talk about that, and I think it's something that a lot of youth, not even just immigrant youth, but youth from immigrant families kind of deal with. You're stuck between two worlds. You're told that you really should belong to one of these worlds, and you have conflicting cultural ideas, and you don't really know how to identify or define yourself um, through that. But so again, like I really felt like an outsider for most of my life because I didn't really feel feel like I truly fit into any of these categories, and I've also come to the realization that I don't need to fit into any of these categories, that I don't need a cultural categorization to help me understand who I am and help me construct my identity for myself. So what I'm going to do is read off of a blog post that I had written earlier for a different blog that I do with a friend. So the blog post is called Cultural Coffufle, and I'd really like to get feedback and thoughts and ideas from other people who have similar experiences or just have some criticism and feedback to get back to me. And so I'd like to start off by kind of saying that I was inspired and kind of really pushed by this book that I read by a woman named Ghada Karmi. She wrote an autobiography about her experience as a young girl in Palestine who had to move to England because of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And she did an amazing job, talking about that conflict from a very personal level, but also kind of outlining I guess, sort of the immigrant experience, the idea of, she moved to England, when she was as a teenager, so she really grew up in two different parts of the world and really grew up with two different cultures. And she felt like, as a young woman, she didn't really know where she belonged. Like she was really stuck between two different worlds and two different conflicting worlds. And she had external factors, family, people in England, other Palestinians, telling her, this is who you are and this is who you should feel like you are. But still at that same time, feeling that conflict and not really resonating with either cultures, and again, just being stuck in the middle and kind of feeling lost. And she ended off the book by saying that in complete honesty that she still felt really lost, and that she felt like she lost her identity and her roots, and really didn't really know who she was in terms of a culture and in terms of I guess nationalism and whatnot. But it's a wicked book. So again, her name is Ghada Karmi. It's Ghada Karmi, Krmi, and I don't remember the name of the book, but please look her up. It's an amazing book, and I think her experience, when I read it, I was completely taken back. Like I felt like, damn, like this is like the first time that I can completely relate to what someone was saying and talking about. Like I felt like I really related to that experience about being stuck between two different worlds and having conflicting messages from external forces, whether it's your parents or your relatives or your friends at school, or whether it's the media, or whether it's the government. People telling you this is who you are, this is what you should feel like according to your race, according to the culture that you supposedly belong to, and then just none of that resonating and feeling totally lost and not really knowing who you are. So what I'm going to do is just read off of the blog post, and then I'd like to get some thoughts and critiques on it. So the blog post is called Culture Kerfuffle, and this is what I wrote. So before I do this, I would like to express a few of my viewpoints informed by what I've learned in my program so far. Firstly, I share the point of view that culture is constructed among a people who share a history and experience. I mean to say that a culture as a system of values is constructed and not the word itself, although we created the word to identify this type of system. What I'm trying to say is that it's not an innate knowledge, rather we are taught culture and cultural values. Secondly, human history shows us that for a larger part of the human timeline, we have been nomadic, moving from place to place. This brings me to my third point, that what we have now, nation states, have been constructed over the course of human history. I personally have trouble with the idea of drawing borders around land and regulating the movement of people, which really means deciding who fits where and how we can control people and their movements. And not and by we, I don't really mean we, I mean states. Um, and we should be asking, who these borders were drawn for and in what context, and whether they are truly reflective of the inhabitants within those borders. Even better, were these borders even decided by the people who lived there, or was it drawn for them by an outside power, and in brackets, colonization? On the third question, I don't see a nation as reflective of a single culture. One of the reasons that I have trouble understanding the logic behind borders. For example, in Canada and especially India, a border has essentially been drawn around plural cultures, and in the case of India, numerous distinct cultures. Indian culture is rather an interesting idea. There are so many cultures and peoples within borders of India, and they are quite distinct from each other. I know that about Punjabi culture, but it would only take me going to a different part of Punjab to step into a completely different world where I wouldn't be able to understand language or comprehend cultural norms. Um, so in essence, there isn't some sort of universal homogeneous Indian culture, and why should there be? Also note that in the case of India, not only does the border try to encompass numerous distinct peoples, but this border was not constructed by the peoples themselves, but rather an outside colonizing force, Britain. Fourth, the concept of the word immigrant is a concept as well, meaning that like culture and like nations is an idea, not a natural occurring definition. It aids in easy and efficient categorization of the other, and yet another tool of systemic oppression from colonization. To say that someone is an immigrant is to say that they aren't a citizen, they are not afforded or deserve the same rights, constitutional rights or human rights, or the same place in society as a citizen, and are therefore open to systemic oppression and control. An example of this would be the plight of migrant workers who suffer deplorable working conditions, and this will be explored in a further time. And just on that note, I'd also advise you to check out Harper's two-tier wage system, which was in the Omnibus Bill, making it legal to pay migrant workers a wage that's 15% lower than the average. So again, please check that out. The reason I bring up these points is that I want to show that cultures, national borders, and immigrants are constructs and should always be seen this way and not seen as a natural phenomenon that has always existed. So Indian, Canadian, or American are constructed cultural systems. You can be born into a place identified as America, however, that doesn't make you American. You are not born American. You may, however, be Americanized by learning and internalizing American culture. To be quite frank, to assume someone naturally internalizes, for example, Indian culture because that person's parents or they themselves are born in India, I believe is a form of racism. Yes, I was born in India. No, I do not have the Indian national anthem memorized or naturally dance the Bhangra. More importantly, just because I was born in a land identified as India, I'm not naturally math inclined or able to fix your computer. Thank you very much. I was born in India, however, I immigrated to Canada at the age of 2. I believe that if I'm to be considered Indian, I should have internalized Indian culture, which I have not, having been raised in a Canadian society. At the same time, I can't fully identify myself as Canadian, as my parents taught me values stemming from their culture, and I grew up around Punjabi culture as much as I grew up around Canadian culture. I think that this is a problem that children who have immigrated to North America are children of immigrants face, because we live in a society full of the need to categorization, especially according to culture and ethnicity, is we of course want to figure out where we fit and where we belong. However, in terms of culture and ethnic background, we are caught between two different worlds, our country of origin and the country of immigration. We can't completely relate to just Canadian or just Indian, nor are we accepted by either. In Canada, we are Indian. In India, we are Canadian. We belong to both, but belong to neither. And on a side note, I also noted that the word Indo-Canadian really bugs me. There's something that bothers me. I think it's a term that I think it's the idea of Canadianizing Indian. An Indo-Canadian is more acceptable than an Indian. Actually, even if immigration did not occur recently in a person's family history, we still feel the need to with them identify them with a non-Canadian culture. The question, what's your nationality, can never be answered with Canadian if the answer is a person from a visible minority. They are probed until we reach far into their lineage and find their true nationality because apparently that is much more telling of their character. I would also like to note that culture does not have to be attached to an ethnic group. Hip hop culture, hipster, indie, scene, emo, steampunk are all forms of culture, and I still think that there is an issue with, confining an individual to a certain culture and saying that, this is who you are, this is who you should be, and this is what um, your characteristics and um, the the ideas of who you are stem from whatever cultural group you belong to. So that's my rant on culture. And again, I totally felt like an outsider most of my life, and I'm learning. I've learned to use identify myself on my own terms, and construct my identity on different terms that don't involve that kind of categorization and that kind of oppressive categorization. Um, so yeah, I'd love to get some thoughts and some ideas on what other people think. And again, uh, what I experienced, the idea of being an outsider really speaks to only my experience. I think some people can relate to it maybe, but I definitely don't want to speak for all Indian children who've immigrated here, and I don't want to speak for all immigrant youth as well. That's not my job, that's not my task, and that's not my right to. I think, again, experiences are really distinct to the individual. So I'd love to hear what other people experience and what other people have to say about culture and ethnicity, and identity. So thank you, and check you out soon later.